All right, have a feeling that the Bitcoin conversation might take up a little bit of time. Both Alex and Andy are here to support this discussion because they are definitely the brains behind this. I feel pretty good about my knowledge and understanding of it, but it does not compare to theirs, so they may chime in. But what I'm going to do is kind of take you through a relatively basic understanding of Bitcoin, then go into a little further discussion on Bitcoin, but also on cryptocurrency and on blockchain. And then we're going to jump to a few pages in this PowerPoint that I think will prove as not only a summary, but also a visual that will help support how Bitcoin actually works. So in thinking through this, we decided to mimic a great article out there that talks about apples and how to teach a 5-year-old about Bitcoin. And the way I changed this or shifted it was I just want to simplify it and shorten it so that it'd be easy for us to present to you today. So if I were to give you this pen and you were sitting right next to me and you take it, then we just completed an exchange. We just completed a transaction. I don't have the pen anymore. You have it. We didn't need any attorney. We didn't need anybody else to oversee that transaction. We made the decision and we executed it ourselves. But let's say that I took a picture of this pen, or this pen didn't exist in its tangible form, but it was a picture, a digital picture of the pen. And then I give it to you. So the means by which I give it to you, I can give it to you on a thumb drive, I can email it to you, I can send it to you through various means. But how do you know that it's the only digital picture of that exact pen? How do you know it isn't all over the internet and people from all over the world are downloading it at the very moment that you are? Or maybe I made multiple copies of it and I have it on my computer. A solution could be an actual ledger that tracks the exact digital pen from its origination. Who owned it, if there were ever any copies made. But how can we replicate me giving you the pen where there is no question that you are now the only one with that exact digital pen? What if we make a copy of that ledger where we're tracking all the activity with it, and we made that ledger available to anybody and everybody who wanted access to it? It'd be on the cloud where, again, everybody could access it and review it. Nobody could edit it. Nobody could change it. The ledger would reflect every single transaction of that digital pen from the time it was created. So you could actually see the entire history of that digital pen. And there's no way to cheat. There's no way to create duplicates of that exact digital pen. And there's not one person controlling the ledger, so there's no way to cheat. Even better, everyone who chooses would have access to this digital ledger, and they could be part of the effort to protect it. For one's efforts in protecting it, they're awarded a new digital pen as payment. Protecting the original digital pen creates more digital pens, and that is the only way to create new digital pens. But there are only so many digital pens that can be created as determined by the ledger. Therefore, they are limited as a result, and therefore scarce. That's the Bitcoin protocol and how it works. Every time a Bitcoin or a fractional share of Bitcoin changes hands, it's actually reflected in a ledger, a digital ledger. Nobody inputs it on the ledger, it just happens automatically, and there's no legal authority involved. The transaction either happened or it didn't happen, and the ledger reflects it. The result is that you can now trade in any denominations of that digital pen. You can trade one entire pen, a fraction of a pen, or many pens because it's digital. You can even attach things to that digital pen as part of the transaction, such as a contract, a stock trade, etc. But how does one assign a value to that digital pen so that the person honoring the contract in exchange for the digital pen knows what they are getting? The value changes every second, but it can be easily found online these days. And the person receiving the Bitcoin or the digital pen can then use it in exchange for something else. Or they can take the risk of holding it until it is of higher value or perhaps of lower value. You see, no, go ahead.
Are you going to go into this or we're going to summarize this at the end?
Nah, I think I'll summarize it at the end. Yeah. So you see, Bitcoin was developed as a means to allow individuals to complete financial transactions outside of traditional banking and financial systems. The explanation of the technology was actually published in a 2008 Yes, 2008, 13 years ago. It was published in a 2008 white paper by an anonymous author who was given the name Satoshi Nakamoto. From that white paper, a handful of coders started to create what would become the Bitcoin blockchain. I'm going to explain the difference between Bitcoin and the blockchain in just a couple minutes. But much like a dollar is made up of 100 pennies, a single Bitcoin is made up of 100 million units called Satoshis, after this anonymous person who was given the name Satoshi Nakamoto. So if you had 50 million Satoshis, you would have half a Bitcoin. However, unlike the US dollar, no single one country can control Bitcoin. That's actually the point of Bitcoin. It's decentralized to all users, so they can collectively retain control. And this is where blockchain actually comes into play. Blockchain is simply just a type of technology. At its very basic elements, a blockchain is essentially a ledger, we remember that from just a couple moments ago, which records transactions, much like ledgers that have been used for hundreds of years. However, unlike a traditional ledger, a blockchain has the ability to remain permanent, indelible, and unalterable, meaning that once a transaction has been recorded on the blockchain, there is absolutely no way to undo that transaction. It's forever recorded in the blockchain. So if blockchain is a technology, what is Bitcoin? And the best way to envision the relationship between Bitcoin and blockchain is that blockchain is a technology and Bitcoin is the specific utilization of that technology. Think of it this way, similar to how your cell phone carrier has its own cellular network, and that's different from other carriers' cellular networks. So Bitcoin has blockchain. This is how hundreds and hundreds of different cryptocurrencies have actually been created. Bitcoin was just the first use of the blockchain technology. Now, the use of blockchain has grown beyond its use for just cryptocurrencies. One application of blockchain would be to use it for what we call smart contracts. A smart contract is simply an agreement between two or more entities to engage in a transaction. In the future, we will more than likely see smart contracts for things like mortgages, payrolls, taxes, voting, supply chain management, insurance, financial trades, the list goes on and on. And since this application of the blockchain is still in its infancy, we'll have to save that topic for another day. There's just way too much to cover. But back to Bitcoin blockchain specifically. To achieve permanency of the ledger, the Bitcoin blockchain is maintained by a network of machines. Think like a computer server. And those are all over the world, not controlled by any one person or any one company. These machines are called nodes, N-O-D-E-S. The job of these nodes is to verify and record transactions on the blockchain. These nodes are not approving transactions, they're just verifying them. To verify transactions on the blockchain, these nodes group pending transactions together in blocks. Think of these blocks as new pages in a ledger. Each time a block is completed, it gives way to the next block in the chain, hence the word blockchain. Each block has information in it that references the block before it and the block after it. To simplify that, think about page numbers and how they work. However, in order to determine the page number of a block, miners in the network are racing to complete complex mathematical equations to determine a block's page number. Once the equation is solved, two things actually happen. First, the new block is added to the blockchain, and second, a new Bitcoin is minted. The miner who actually solved the problem received that newly minted Bitcoin. And this Bitcoin can now be used to trade for things or services, just like the dollar, like gold, or hundreds of years ago, tulips, wampum, etc. In its most simplistic terms, that is what Bitcoin is. So from 10,000 feet, if we just accept Bitcoin for what it is, it's actually a pretty simple concept. It means a transfer of value. But there are several other important aspects about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain that are a little more complex. Number one, like gold, the supply of Bitcoin is a finite amount. And like gold, we know how much of it is in circulation. However, unlike gold, when it comes to Bitcoin, we know exactly how much of it is left to be mined. We don't know how much gold there is to be mined. Currently in circulation, there are about 18.68 million Bitcoin out of a possible total supply of 21 million Bitcoin. Though we might have an idea of how much gold is in the world, the amount left to be mined, we still don't know. Number two, unlike fiat currency, so think of fiat currency as paper dollar bills or metal coins, Bitcoin takes up absolutely no physical space. Remember, Bitcoin are just entries in a ledger. To access those entries, you are assigned a Bitcoin address and two keys. The Bitcoin address and its keys are just a long sequence of numbers. And the Bitcoin address is actually the shortest in length. Let me scroll down. Sort of like your bank account number. Think of it that way. From your Bitcoin address, you add a few numbers and you get your public key. This public key is what you give to other Bitcoin owners who want to send you a Bitcoin. This is how they know where to send it. It's impossible for the receiver of the public key to actually know which part of that key is just your Bitcoin address, which part of it is the additional numbers that were added to create the public key. Therefore, your Bitcoin cannot be taken with just having the public key. The second key is what we call that private key. The owner of the private key is essentially the owner of the Bitcoin assigned to that private key. And the private key is the same number as your public key with a bunch more numbers added. So if you have someone's private key, you have all the information you need to control the Bitcoin associated with that address. And the private key is what allows you to unlock and send Bitcoin to other users. So much like if you lose $1 in the wash, it's gone forever to the laundry gods. If you lose your private key, well, that's a big problem if you had a lot of Bitcoin assigned to that Bitcoin address. That's what you do not want to lose, is your Bitcoin private key. One key, your private key, allows you to send and lock up your Bitcoin. The other key looks a lot like the first key, but it's missing a few notches that the first key has. This key still works in the lock, but it only allows you to unlock and receive Bitcoin. Number three, as long as we have our address and our keys, we can send and receive Bitcoin. This means that the method and also cost for sending Bitcoin just requires having the right keys. There are no banks needed. If you want to send $1 million of Bitcoin across the globe instantly, it takes no more time or cost than just the time it takes and the cost of electricity to send the signal with the address information. So think of an email, right? How easy it is to send an email to anywhere in the world. Now today, in some cases, you can send $1 million US dollars without a fee, but you're no doubt paying for that service in some way. Banks don't operate for free, and we've seen that with their profits in this recent quarter. And you still need that bank to complete that transaction. If I wanted to send you $1 million worth of gold or to a friend in Australia, I might as well just buy a first-class plane ticket because it's going to cost me a lot less. Yeah, it cost me as much. It costs so much, excuse me. Number four, remember, the Bitcoin blockchain is unique in that it is decentralized, meaning that there is no one authority that oversees the transactions. Instead, that network of nodes maintains and oversees the network. Transactions are not approved, they're only confirmed. You may recall when these transactions are confirmed, they are stored on the blockchain and it's a permanent ledger, meaning that all past transactions can be found and traced. And it is true that at its inception, Bitcoin was used for malicious activity. These users liked Bitcoin because at the time they could use the Bitcoin blockchain to send money without having to get a bank involved. But if we go back to the permanency of the blockchain, the sending and receiving of Bitcoin can always be tracked on the blockchain. There's always going to be a record of that transaction. It's been reported that in 2019, only 2.1% of all cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, but of all cryptocurrency transactions were part of criminal activity. In today's world, it's probably safer to transact criminal business using the US dollar or gold than it is with Bitcoin because of that permanency of the Bitcoin transaction. And think about it. If you watch things like the El Chapo series on Netflix, what are they bearing all over their country? Cold hard cash. Just as interesting, it's been said that it is nearly impossible to find a $100 bill that does not have a trace of cocaine on it. So criminal activity exists in every asset of value, whether it be the US dollar, gold, Bitcoin, or whatever else there might be out there. Bitcoin is certainly a once in a lifetime development. And with all the new and innovative ideas that come with risks, first, governments around the world are still unsure of how to regulate it. Just recently, Turkey banned the use of Bitcoin and all other cryptocurrencies for payments. India has a bill on the table that would criminalize the possession, issuance, mining, trading, and transferring of crypto assets. Some governments, including the US, are currently looking into creating their own government-issued national digital currency, or CBDC as it's called. And it remains to be seen how this might impact Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in the future. Another concern is the constant need for computing power. The energy consumed by the Bitcoin network is extensive. It's calculated that in a 12-month period, the Bitcoin network uses somewhere between 40 and 440 terawatt hours, with 111 terawatt hours as the central estimate. That's the same as the annual electricity consumption of the Netherlands. Interestingly, it's still far less than that used by data centers worldwide, which is estimated to be about 199 terawatt hours. And approximately 2/3 of energy that Bitcoin miners use comes from polluting sources. So there's definitely a lot of room for growth and improvement in terms of the energy being used for Bitcoin mining. Lastly, though there are many other risks and unknowns, the addresses associated with the unknown author of the white paper contain over 1 million Bitcoin. These Bitcoins have not been moved since they were mined in some of the earliest blocks. Should the identity of the creator ever come out, or the creator decide to access these Bitcoin, that could have a pretty significant impact on the price of Bitcoin. Even without those 1 million Bitcoin being put into circulation, Bitcoin has experienced extreme volatility in its history. It's not uncommon to see a 15 or even 30% swing in either direction in a single day. And just this past weekend, overnight Saturday, we saw a 15% decline. This ability for price fluctuation is why many people view Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as an investment. Others view Bitcoin as just another currency. That's because, like fiat currency backed by the full faith and credit of a government, Bitcoin has scarcity, is divisible, it has utility, it's transportable, and has almost infinite durability, and is also nearly impossible. It is impossible to counterfeit. Still, others equate Bitcoin to a store of value, like gold. But of all the uses for Bitcoin, this remains the most debatable. In order for something to be a store of value, there must be intrinsic value to it. Since Bitcoin itself is not physical, its only intrinsic value would be as a medium of exchange. If Bitcoin does not achieve success as a medium of exchange, it will have no practical utility and thus no intrinsic value itself. Without that intrinsic value, Bitcoin won't be appealing as a store of value. Whether or not to buy Bitcoin is a very personal decision that, like all financial decisions, should be taken into account the entirety of your financial situation. With this in mind, we are restricted to types of questions that we can answer in this setting, but we ask that any questions that you would like to ask be limited to Bitcoin or blockchain technology. And if you wish to ask a question or talk about your situation specifically, we'd be happy to do so in our next individual meeting with you. I want to jump into this PowerPoint and just summarize some of the points that we talked about here. Can you move that to the big screen? And also show you a nice chart that will be helpful in understanding some of what I just explained to you. Bear with us just a second. And I think you were able to see what the first part here, which is what is Bitcoin. And obviously Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It is not a blockchain. It is a cryptocurrency. It's a digital currency. The creator remains anonymous as of today. It's maintained by a network of machines around the world that are referred to as nodes. They're just computers. It is a completely open network. All transactions, past and current, can always be viewed on the blockchain for anybody who chooses to. New Bitcoin is created or mined on a daily basis. The total supply will not exceed 21 million, and it's estimated to be in full supply by the year 2140. so roughly 120 years from now. Bitcoin can be broken into smaller units called Satoshis. And one Bitcoin, if you remember, is 100 million Satoshis. We're going to provide you with the article from Apple. What's that?
So that's what 1 Satoshi is right there, right now.
Oh, not even 6 cents.
Right. Not even 1 cent.
Yeah. By the way, interpretation of a Satoshi in US dollars is it's not even worth close to a penny. Right? It's 100 million of them in one Bitcoin. Bitcoin's valued about $55,000. So the last there, we're going to provide you with a link or a copy of an article that we think is one that helps to simplify the understanding of Bitcoin. And it's simply titled, Explain Bitcoin to Me Like I'm a 5-year-old or something along those lines. And you'll see very quickly that the digital pen example that I used is piggybacked off of that article. Bitcoin mining. Miners verify transactions on the Bitcoin network, and pending transactions are grouped into blocks. Mining Bitcoin is a competition to actually solve an algorithmic puzzle first. And the greater proportion of mining power a miner contributes to the network, the greater their chances of being able to solve that puzzle first. Miners take the information from the last confirmed block and their block of pending transactions, and then add a random number to it. By including the information from the last confirmed block, a chain of blocks is created. And again, I'm going to show you a visual of this in a moment. The random number is literally just a guess, which is why it takes so much energy and effort for these nodes to figure it out. The miner who accurately takes the last block, the pending transactions, and correctly guesses the random number is rewarded with a new Bitcoin. Each time a new block is added to the blockchain, new Bitcoin enters the supply. So Andy, let's go to the visual here. Stick with me, I want to walk you through this. So let's start up on the top left-hand side, and we're going to just go all the way over to the right. So someone requests a transaction, right? And this is a peer-to-peer transaction. So you and me, peer-to-peer. The requested transaction is broadcast to a peer-to-peer network consisting of computers known as nodes. So that request for the transaction is pushed out. And then the peer-to-peer network of nodes validates, doesn't approve it, they validate that the transaction and that the user's status using the known algorithms. So picture that green box there is actually our transaction, the one we just agreed to and completed. I'm going to follow that up below in a moment, but let's go to the right. A verified transaction can involve cryptocurrency, contracts, records, or other information. And if you continue to follow that below, you'll see that cryptocurrency is often the basis for this. It has no intrinsic value in that it is not redeemable for another commodity. It has no physical form and exists only in the network. Its supply is not determined by a central bank, and the network is completely decentralized. So let's go back to the green box. Andy, will you just put your mouse over that top green box for a moment? So let's picture this. Now we're talking about one block, and then Andy, go down and show our green box in this blockchain. Our agreement, our contract, just became a piece of a chain of other contracts, which is what all those yellow boxes represent. Our box is the green one, and right now it's the final one in that blockchain. The reason that it can't be changed or altered is because whoever would attempt to do that would have to solve all of the other contracts, the formulas for all those other contracts just to get to ours. So if you know, once verified, the transaction is combined with other transactions to create a new block of data for the ledger. The new block is then added to the existing blockchain in a way that it is permanent and unalterable. And then the transaction is complete. Simple, right? Let's go to the next page before we open it up for a couple other pages before we go to discussion. So the pros to Bitcoin and blockchain: it's nearly impossible to hack or make changes to the blockchain. There's a limited supply, which is what provides value for Bitcoin. There's transparency in the transactions. They're all traceable all the way back to the very first one. It's decentralized. There's virtually no or minimal transactional costs, and it takes virtually no or minimal space to store Bitcoin. But of course, with it come risks. government regulations, the identity of the original creator, if that's determined or comes out, the volatility, quantum computing, right? Could a supercomputer be created that can solve all of those algorithms? Energy consumed by Bitcoin, by the network, constant computing power required to keep the network going. Finally, how can you get exposure to Bitcoin? There are publicly traded mining companies, so companies that trade on the stock exchange that are responsible, or their primary focus is mining actual Bitcoin. Publicly traded investment products such as Bitcoin trusts, publicly traded companies that transact in the sector, so like Tesla, who will allow a transaction to occur, and then publicly traded companies that actually hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. MicroStrategy, Overstock, those are companies who actually are holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which makes their value go up as Bitcoin goes up or down as Bitcoin goes down. Those are the 4 ways that you can actually have exposure to Bitcoin, leaving out the fact that you could actually have a Bitcoin itself. So we just covered a ton, and I see question marks over every single person's head. Whether we can answer them or not, we will let you know. Some of them, unfortunately, we cannot answer for compliance reasons unless we are in an individual meeting. But we want to open this up for questions, so let's have at it. And the support team here, Andy and Alex, are probably going to be best for some of these questions, but I'll try to tackle them too.
Is there investment opportunities there, or is that the equivalent, if you will, of Bitcoin?
It's not the equivalent of Bitcoin. So picture your mobile phone and the network that it has to be on in order for you to be able to complete a call. You can own the mobile phone of the Bitcoin, but you can't own the network. Blockchain is the network that supports the Bitcoin. To this day, you cannot own Bitcoin in an investment account. It is, but you can own it indirectly through those 4 exposure pieces that I think are still on your website, or still on your screen.
Hey, John, this is Brian.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, you had government regulations up there, and I kind of feel like the government's slowly but surely catching up, and because of maybe the interest in the fact that companies are using it more. Do you have any thoughts there around the government regulations and how that might affect folks actually getting in or even out of Bitcoin?
I think the biggest threat from a government standpoint is if multiple governments go out and create their own version of Bitcoin and what that could do to Bitcoin. No doubt if the U.S. came out and put a bill on the table and passed it, similar to the bill that's on the table in India. China, as some of you may know who pay attention to Bitcoin, China's been really hard on Bitcoin. But this article comes out and says China has softened its tone on Bitcoin, calling it an investment alternative after years of cracking down on the crypto. So there's no easy answer to your question, unfortunately. And that's one of the risks that we have to accept as being in place if we are going to invest in anything related to cryptocurrency or Bitcoin itself. And
they don't want to regulate it too much because they see the value of blockchain technology.
Blockchain is going to change the world probably more quickly than the internet did.
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you. And I did hear that I think it was a week or so ago that the first tweet that went out, they encrypted that, I guess, with Bitcoin. So it was actually starting the something that uses, whether it be priceless art or what have you, that you can actually use blockchain to.
What you're referring to there, so Bitcoin, think of it as a currency, right? That isn't what is done on artwork. That is actually an NFT, non-fungible token, which, so, if you're an artist and you create a digital piece of art, you can sell that on the marketplace and somebody can pay you with Bitcoin. But now they own the rights to that art and perhaps you have a royalty from it. And forevermore, it can be tracked as a result of blockchain. So every time it gets sold, even if you had no idea it was sold, if you're the originator of it, you're getting paid whatever the royalty was, no matter what. It can never be stolen. It can be never can be duplicated, never altered. So you forever have, because of blockchain, an ability to track where and when the transactions occurred on that piece of art. It's really pretty wild. But again, I don't want to get into NFTs, non-fungible tokens, because that's a whole different day's conversation.
Let's compare for a moment gold to Bitcoin. Could you compare the two as part of an investment portfolio?
Sure. So let's talk about the differences. Well, let's talk about the similarities. If you want this pen, and I tell you it's worth an ounce of gold or half a Bitcoin, whatever it is, and you want it bad enough, and you give me whichever of the two, then I've agreed to exchange it for you for the value as I interpreted or as deemed for that portion of Bitcoin or that piece of gold. So they have value in that they can be exchanged for something else as long as the person agrees to it, the other person agrees to it. Where they are different is you can touch gold, right? It's tangible. You can touch it, you can move it, you can store it. Bitcoin, you cannot touch. It's not tangible.
All right, no, I get that. I guess where I'm going with this is, would you rather have 2% of your portfolio in gold or 2% in Bitcoin? Would you rather have 4% in both? Would you rather have none?
I wish I could answer that, Jim, but for compliance reasons, I cannot.
Well, we can.
One-on-one, we can talk about that though. Understand why Bitcoin is an unregulated asset and we are an over-regulated industry.
I was just gonna say, it took us a lot of hoops to jump through.
Yeah, and I should emphasize, Andy just said, we had to go through tremendous hoops just to get this presentation approved because of the topic being Bitcoin and it being an unregulated asset or unregulated, just unregulated.
Let me ask it a different way. John, do you own Bitcoin?
I own gold as well. So just so I can comment on that because it'll come up. John, why do you own gold and I don't? Pretty much everybody on this call owns gold in their first Eagle fund, which is about 15% gold that fund is. That's how I own my gold as well, the same way you do. We're just opening up the chats to see what folks are asking.
So the mysterious part of it is a little off-putting only because an anonymous person created it and these nodes seem to operate, but are they just so smart computers that they just operate on their own? And it seems as though there could be another shoe to drop or something that we just, we don't understand or in the technology of it because of the mystery.
Every investment that we own, there's the potential for a shoe to drop, right? So it could be Coca-Cola. It could mean anything that we own. There's the potential for a shoe to drop. There's the potential for regulations to come out to change the company that we thought was going to benefit us dramatically. And so too is the case for Bitcoin or for any cryptocurrency. So I recognize the concerns you have. That's why we spelled those out. Like any investment, there is definitely a risk. Are the risks greater with Bitcoin? Potentially, yes. And that's why we see so much volatility with it versus a lot of the other investments in your portfolio. A 15 to 30% move on the upside or downside in a given day is huge in the markets. You don't see that very often. As a matter of fact, it's pretty darn rare for one single position to have more than one or two 15 or 30% moves in a day or in any given day. So again, you just have to recognize that one, if it's ever part of your portfolio, it should be a minimal part. Two, the risks are very clear. And three, those risks are reflected in the volatility of the investment.
Someone, we don't know who, created this, made all the programs that make the blockchain function, everything else, and being really shallow on knowledge about this kind of stuff, here's my concern. Every computer program in the world is hackable. How do we know this is secure? Because people are trying to hack it all the time and no one's done it yet. Since the person who created this is anonymous, I'm just struggling.
Yes, one person did come up with this idea, but then the idea was published in a white paper and numerous people came in to create the blockchain. And since then, thousands of nodes are owned by individuals or companies, but many thousands or hundreds of thousands of owners of those nodes came in to create the various pieces of blockchain. And in order for a technology to come in to undo any one of those blocks in the blockchain, they would have to undo all the ones that came after it and all the ones that came before it.
Sorry, I was reading Alex.
Yeah.
So talk about the open source.
In order to attack that one particular contract, they would have to undo all the blockchains after it.
Right.
And remember, there are new contracts appearing every second. So as fast as they're moving to undo the contracts that came after the one they're trying to undo, there are new ones coming every second that they have to undo as well.
So,
Which is one of the beauties of this. It makes it pretty much impossible to undo it.
so it's, even if they weren't shooting for one particular piece of blockchain, let's just say they're going for whatever. Obviously, I don't have the depth of knowledge anywhere close enough to understand that, except in a surface way.
Blockchain, right? It's blockchain stacked on top of blockchain, on top of blockchain, on top of blockchain.
I guess too, any of our investments are vulnerable. It's on a piece of paper, it's on a digital screen. Like if it disappeared somehow, we might be hard pressed to prove it. I mean, I guess that's the risk of the time we live in, right? Because we don't have it in the basement. Is that right?
So when cryptocurrencies supported by blockchain have become so popular is because of how nearly impossible it is, or how safe the blockchains actually are. Andy, I want you to comment on. I'm gonna have Andy slide over to in the screen to comment on it. And then Alex, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so I was just going to comment on, so kind of like what John was saying is, in order to basically manipulate the blockchain, someone would have to undo all pending transactions, undo any transactions that were verified after that one transaction you might want to manipulate has been done, or you're trying to manipulate, re-verify that block, and then go in and start trying to verify any blocks that have been created since then. But you have to do that all in the time that the network of nodes around the world are verifying the pending transactions. So just from a timing standpoint, it's just not possible at this point. And that's why quantum computing was considered a risk, because that might be the only way that it could be done, but that's not even, that might be impossible as well.
Oh, it seems impossible. It's possible in the future. I mean, people are always inventing things. Things are always happening. I don't want to dominate too long. This is just the questions I have are about the security involved. And, you know, since we don't know who created it, how do we know there are back doors people can go into? And I use that.
Those are part of your risks.
Yep.
So it's just a risk factor that exists all the time.
Right, but I would equate it, and certainly not the same, but any investment that you own.
I guess actually I'll add to that, for Andy, this is Brian. Like the things that I've read out there, that if there's any shady things that are happening, it's really around people hacking into the accounts, much like they could hack into your existing account if they figured out your username and password, and then get access to your Bitcoin or whatever you have, and then take it out of your account, which is, I think, to your point, it's tough to hack the actual coins themselves. It's easier to hack your account with the username and password. It's
almost impossible to hack the network. It's very possible to obtain the private key that John mentioned. You know, like you just said, there's email phishing attacks where someone might send out a fake email that looks like a exchange where you could buy cryptocurrency, and you click on a link and then enter your credentials, and now your credentials have been entered, and it's actually gone to someone that now takes that and can steal the cryptocurrency in your wallet.
Just to point out, those 4 exposures to Bitcoin that we talked about in that PowerPoint page, none of those do you actually have a private key or a public key. You are indirect owners of Bitcoin, and as a result have no private key or public key to protect.
Right, funds the same kind of security risks as any other investment, and I mentioned that earlier, and I kind of get that.
Like the entire, you said like if the grid came down, like what would happen? So I'll just take any big bank you want, and their website or their server gets hacked. If their server got hacked, their entire system would be down. If you had money with that bank, you would not be able to transact or do anything. This past weekend, what caused the big dip was there was a massive blackout in China where several nodes are hosted, but just that blackout basically created uncertainty for a short period of time, but nodes all over the world were able to hold the network up because it's so decentralized. So that's another difference. Like if you have all of your money at one bank and that bank server is hacked or goes down, the entire bank system is down. If one node is brought down, or a full continent of nodes or a country of nodes is brought down, Bitcoin survives because it's so decentralized and there's support for the network all over the world.
It's a great way to explain it.
Right, so the case is really that it actually is safer than our other investments if looked at in that.
Well, we didn't say that. And we can't say that. The investment in Bitcoin, we certainly can't say that. Blockchain as a technology,
right,
because of it being decentralized, is safer than the technology that where you have your money in the bank. It's safer than that technology. Any other questions before we let you go off and dream about Bitcoin tonight?
Are there any things you want to mention around like taxing from a government? You know, I know Bitcoin is taxable. Is that something that you can talk about?
Up until last year, governments have struggled with taxation of Bitcoin because it was so difficult to track. But the IRS has come out and clearly stated that the transactions of Bitcoins is a taxable event. All crypto, I should say. Sorry. Yep. All cryptocurrency is a taxable event. And if not reported, certainly penalized to the same extent any other dishonest handling of your tax return would be handled. You know, it goes along the lines of any investment. So you own it for 12 months and a day or longer, it's taxable as long-term capital gains. And shorter than that, it's taxable as short-term capital gains, which is equal to your tax bracket, your income tax bracket. By the way, there is no exchange either. So some of you might be thinking of like a 1031 exchange for real estate. That does not exist in cryptocurrency. So if you exchange one cryptocurrency for another, that is a taxable event. One cryptocurrency for a Tesla, that is a taxable event.
How does the government know that you have cryptocurrency?
You check the box on your, or the means through which you own it provides that service, meaning they provide reporting to the government, which most of them do now.
Yeah, and going back into like the regulation conversation, I think you're just going to see stricter KYC, know your customer regulations, and that's basically how it gets tied to you as the owner. So if you were to go buy it on exchange, you would have to input your driver's license, all of that, your social, you link a bank account, that's linking it to your person. There's really very few ways today compared to 5-6 years ago where you could basically own it anonymously.
Isn't like the uptake of like privacy coins going to start moving up to take care of that?
Can you give an example? Are you talking about like a Monero or?
Well, yeah, like a Monero, or like I think I just read something about, I can't remember the encryption messaging service in the UK that Signal, that is buying like a privacy coin. So basically you can have an encrypted message and transfer, everything will be kind of like on the blockchain, but you can't trace it.
That's for a future day when we have permission to address it. Sorry. So I just want to say that all the pages of the PowerPoint stated this. None of this was intended to be investment advice. You should make decisions on your own and through conversations with us individually. This was meant to be an educational service to you and help provide further details on Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency in general. We hope you found it beneficial. Please, again, do not interpret any of this as suggestion that you should own it. But again, we're happy to have any discussions with you on a one-on-one basis to discuss it further. So with that said, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you taking some time out of your Monday afternoon to join us. Be safe, be smart, be healthy, and extend the same to your family. And again, thank you.